In this video, we're going over the best rare quality magic items from any official sourcebook. And at number 10, we have the Flame Tongue. This is a magic item sword, which allowed you to add 2d6 fire damage to each of your hits, as long as you activate the effect with a bonus action first. And this extra fire damage lasts for as long as you want, essentially, and it can be used as many times per day as you want as well. So as long as you have a free bonus action at the start of combat, you get an extra 2d6 fire damage to all of your hits, which is the same damage dice as a greatsword, and is almost like having an additional weapon attack every time you strike with it. The item can be any sword, but there's no guarantee that if you get this item in a game, that the DM will give you the sword that you want specifically. But if you are able to pick the one you want, you could use this as a rapier or a greatsword or whatever. There's surprisingly not too many magic weapons at this level of rarity, outside of the generic +1 or vicious weapons, and Flame Tongue gives this extra damage at the cost of not being a +1 weapon, which is definitely more damage overall, even if it probably has slightly less chance to hit than a standard +1 weapon. Of all the items that will appear on this list, this is definitely the only melee weapon. Everything else will just be wondrous items and one staff. And at number 9, we have the Necklace of Fireballs. This is a necklace which does not require attunement, but that's only because it has a limited amount of uses. Basically, what you can do with this necklace is detach one of its beads as an action, which are allowed to be thrown up to 60 feet away, and when it reaches the end of its trajectory, it explodes as if it was a 3rd level fireball spell. And Fireball is definitely one of the strongest level 3 spells in the game, so it's a really nice effect to have. This can essentially give any player who has access to this to one of your strongest mid-level AoE abilities in the game, without having to use a spell slot. In addition, you're able to throw multiple of the beads, or even the entire necklace as one action. And if you do, you get to increase the level of the fireball explosion by 1 for each bead. And the necklace has the potential to have up to 9 beads on it when you find it, as it has 1d6 plus 3 beads each. However, once you run out of the beads, the item is done, so it's a pretty temporary power boost when you have it, but having a potential 9 extra fireballs for anyone who has the necklace is really good, and there's lots of creative uses you can use the beads with. And at number 8, we have the Staff of the Woodlands. This is a staff which can only be attuned to by a druid, and counts as a +2 magical quarterstaff if you use it as a melee weapon, and it also gives you a +2 bonus to your spell attack rolls, so it kind of functions like a +2 wand of the war mage, which is really good baseline. In addition to this, it has 10 charges and allows you to cast a whole bunch of druid spells, and they can also use the spell Pass Without Trace, at will essentially, without using any of the spell slots or charges. And Pass Without a Trace gives everyone in your party +10 to their stealth check, and is super good for allowing groups to sneak past things. So being able to use this as much as you want without spell slots is really valuable in a lot of campaigns. And 2 of the spells it can cast are pretty high level and useful. You can cast Awaken for 5 charges, which is a level 5 spell that allows you to turn a plant or animal into a friendly companion for 30 days, essentially giving you extra action economy. And for 6 charges, you can use the level 6 spell Wall of Thorns, which summons a 20-foot diameter wall of thorns that gives all creatures inside of it double difficult terrain, and does a whole bunch of damage to them if they enter and their turn in the thorns, which is entirely possible if you summon on top of a large group. That way they just won't be able to get out of it before dying to the damage. And it also has a whole bunch of other more niche useful spells, so it has a very wide range of useful things it can do, in addition to the baseline bonus to your spell attack rolls. It also has another minor effect where it can turn into a tree, but that's not as useful as casting Wall of Thorns. And at number 7, we have Ring of Spell Storing. This is a ring which can be attuned to by anyone, and basically allows whoever is wearing it to cast spells. And you see, this ring allows you to hold up to 5 levels worth of spells, and the spells you're allowed to hold are anything that a creature casts into it. So if you have this thing equipped on a martial class who can't use spells, you can just have the spellcasters in your party cast some of their spells into it, so that they'll be able to use them from the ring without having to have their own spell save DC and attack rolls, as it uses the casters who puts the spells into the rings. But since it only holds 5 levels worth, you can't add 6 level or higher spells to it. But even having 5 levels of spells is more than enough to make this thing very powerful, as you can cast Find Familiar into the ring, which can allow whoever uses it to have the Find Familiar spell, which is incredibly useful for all kinds of classes, especially melee ones who can abuse the Familiar's help action to gain advantage. They can also be used to hold Healing Word, which just gives another party member who can use a bonus action heal on people. Or you could just throw 5 charges of Shield spell into it, which will allow whatever class has it to use Shield 5 times, which is an excellent level 1 spell that gives you 5 AC until the start of your next turn, and can be used as a reaction. And this is a really good spell for melee classes to have access to. That's just a couple of uses this ring can have. There's a lot of good ways to take advantage of the ring of spell storing, to the point where it's kind of considered overpowered on certain classes, if they have the availability of some spellcasters in their group giving them certain spells, especially giving a melee character access to 5 shields per day, as long as one of your spellcasters just uses some of their spell slots before a long rest in order to charge the ring. And at number 6, we have the Amulet of Health. This item simply makes your Constitution score 19 while you're attuned to it, and that's it, really. So, this is 1 away from the max, and it has no effect on you if your score is higher than 19. So if you decide to later increase your Constitution score to 20 in order to max it out, then the necklace will no longer have any effect on you. Now, here's the really good thing about this item. With this item, you can essentially ignore your Constitution score, as long as you don't mind it taking up one of your 3 attunement slots. If you know you can obtain an Amulet of Health during character creation, because you're doing a one-shot or starting a higher level campaign, where they give you a magic item at the start, you can just use Constitution as your dump stat if you decide to take the Amulet of Health as one of your items, since no matter what your Constitution score is, it will just shoot up to 19. And 19 is really good. It's just 1 away from the max after all, so it still gives you a +4 modifier. In fact, it's a little bit too good, where some tables ban items like this because they kind of break the balance of your ability score improvements, especially with how good taking your ASI at level 4 is when you level up. And Constitution is useful for every class, so this is just a really nice item to have on low Constitution characters, and kind of an overpowered one to have during character creation, which is why it definitely deserves a spot on this list, at one of the higher spots, and is only beaten out by some of the more potentially broken items. And at number 5, we have the Brazier of Commanding Fire Elementals. This item allows you to summon a fire elemental as if you had cast the Conjure Elemental spell, and can only be used once per day. Now, the fire elemental is really good and everything, but what makes this item valuable is it does not require an attunement. So, once per day you just get a fire elemental for 10 minutes. Now, technically, there are 3 other items just like this one, which summons the other 3 types of elementals, but the fire elemental is the best of the bunch, as the fire elemental has the fire form trait, where it deals fire damage to creatures that it just moves through, and also sets them on fire. It also deals fire damage to anything that attacks it in melee, and its fire attacks also set people on fire. So it easily does the most amount of damage out of all the elementals, especially since it can do damage by just moving through things. And fire elementals have a little over 100 health as they are CR 5 creatures. So this is a really good item to have in the early and mid levels of a campaign. In fact, it's still pretty decent even during high level campaigns because the item doesn't require attunement, and the fire elemental is still pretty beefy at those levels as well. Now, there is a downside to it. The Conjure Elemental spell does require you to hold concentration for the full 10 minutes, so it can break early on damage, and the thing with Conjure Elemental is that the elemental doesn't disappear when concentration is broken, and actually just turns hostile towards your group. So you might have to fight the elemental if your concentration is broken early. Although as long as you just kind of hold back and don't take damage, this isn't a big deal. And you get a super strong creature without an attunement once per day for 10 minutes. And at number 4, we have the Brass Horn of Valhalla. The Horn of Valhalla has a couple of different rarities, and its brass version is the better of the rare versions, as it doesn't require attunement, but as long as you're proficient with all simple weapons, which nearly all adventurers are, you're allowed to blow the horn once every 7 days in order to summon about 9 berserkers on average. And berserkers are pretty beefy CR2 creatures that don't hit very hard, as they only have 1 axe attack. But they have a high enough health pool where they won't go down to a single AoE either. In fact, they can survive a couple of AoEs before going down, as they have more health than most players on average, at around 80 each. And when you summon them with a horn, they stay around for an hour to help you out. So once every 7 days, you can summon around 9 berserkers to help you out with whatever you need, which is a lot more than a fire elemental, and lasts for a lot longer as well. But the cooldown definitely makes it something you can't use every day like you can the fire elemental. Although there's no concentration required to keep the berserkers, Once you summon them, they just kind of help you for the hour before leaving. And this item is kind of so good that a lot of games just straight up don't give it out to players, because it's also kind of hard for a lot of groups to handle a large amount of NPCs that are attacking with you. In which case, I'd highly recommend looking up mob combat rules so you don't have to roll dice for 9 attacks. And at number 3, we have the Belt of Hill Giant Strength. This is the belt similar to the Amulet of Health, where it just gives you a high ability score. In this case, the belt will set your strength score to 21, which is higher than the maximum. Essentially, attuning to this item will give you more strength than you can get naturally outside of being a max level barbarian. But since it's only 21 strength, it won't actually give you a higher score than a +5 to your strength. There are different versions of the Giant Strength belts, and the Hill Giant Strength one is the lowest rarity out of all of them, and grants 21 strength as long as you're wearing it, which is super good. The higher rarity ones just give you more strength, with the best one granting you 29 strength while attuned to it. Now, for the same reasons the Element of Health is really good, the Belt of Hill Giant Strength can be applied to that as well. If you know you're allowed to get an item during character creation, grabbing this belt can allow you to dump your strength score completely, and still be a fully effective fighter who uses strength as their main damage dealing attribute. As the belt actually gives you more strength than you can get normally, so there is no need to put any points into your strength at all as long as you never unattune to the belt, or as long as you just find a better one later on in the campaign. And at number 2, we have the Helm of Teleportation. This is a helmet which simply allows you to cast the teleport spell from it up to 3 times per day, as it has 3 charges and uses 1 charge per cast to teleport, and regains 1d3 charges every day. Now, teleport is a level 7 spell which is incredibly useful. So useful they can kind of break some game settings, as it allows you to skip travel completely in most cases. You see, what it does is allow you to teleport yourself and up to 8 willing creatures to basically any point you can think of, or that you can see in range. And if you decide to teleport somewhere that you can't see, but you are familiar with, there is a chance the spell will fail and have some kind of mishap. And there's a whole rollable table on what mishaps can happen. Basically, you can teleport to places you're very familiar with, or that have teleportation circles pretty easily. Or you can make your chances 100% if you simply have an item from the place you're teleporting to. So as long as you just make sure to take an item from every city or dungeon you explore, you've essentially set a mark on that place that will allow you to teleport back very easily. Just as long as the item is from the place in the last 6 months, which most campaigns will fall under very easily. Honestly, being able to teleport 3 times per day is incredibly good and definitely worth the attunement slot. Unless you're playing some kind of game where it literally takes place in one city and nowhere else, and you know there isn't going to be any travel or just one long dungeon crawl, in which case teleportation might not be that useful. But if there's any kind of travel at all, teleportation is incredibly useful, and being able to gain 3 of them per day from an item is really good. And at number 1, we have Daern's Instant Fortress. This item allows you to place a 1-inch metal cube on the ground in order to speak its command word, which will then grow into a fortress that is 20 feet on each side and 30 feet high, which is nearly indestructible, as each of its walls is immune to all non-magical damage and resistant to everything else. So if you summon this thing and get inside, you're pretty safe from a lot of creatures in the monster manual, as not too many of them have magical damage or weapons. The fortress also has arrow slits which give you 3/4 cover and allow you to attack things outside of it, but this does also mean opponents can attack you while you're inside of it and you're not completely invulnerable. And it has this other useful feature that when the fortress is summoned, it expands rapidly, and will deal 10d10 bludgeoning damage to creatures that are within its expanding radius, half as much if they succeed the saving throw, and then it pushes all those creatures to unoccupied spaces outside the fortress. Now, what's really good about this fortress is that it can create a really good choke point where enemies just can't get past it unless you speak the command word to get rid of it. It can also be used to deal a whole bunch of AoE damage to monsters and instant kill them in most cases, as it easily does more damage than a fireball. And the expansion feature is not limited in its uses. You can use it as many times per day as you want, which seems a little strong. It's also very intentionally vague on how it can function with a lot of its features. So, depending on how lenient your DM is, you could use this as a meteor and just throw it on top of things in order to speak the command word to have it drop on someone. Or you could have a familiar fly to the top of a group of enemies and have it expand. You could throw it at something and have it crush people against walls. The item definitely says you have to use an action to place it on the ground and then speak the command word, but it's also vague on what constitutes the ground and if you need to speak the command word immediately after you place it. and I'm pretty sure this is intentional. There are so many ways to rules lawyer the instant fortress to your advantage that it can kind of be made useless by your DM if they just tell you no to all of its creative uses it can potentially have. Like if you decide to have a patch of dirt on a mage hand in order to technically count that as the ground for the instant fortress to expand from. Or what even constitutes the ground? Does it need to be on a hard, solid surface? Or could it be on top of a wooden plank in the middle of the ocean? Could it be used on a floor in a building, etc., etc.? Basically, if you want to use it the way it was intended, you'd only use it to place it on the floor in order to have a fortress to hide inside of. If you're creative enough and have a DM who allows it, this thing could do more damage than most classes, and could potentially auto-kill enemies if used in narrow corridors. Of course, assuming your DM allows it. I can't stress this part enough. This item has all kinds of arguments online about what you can and can't do with it. Basically, it was intentionally worded kind of vaguely so that DMs could fill in those gaps. And even using it with its intended use is still really strong and kind of overpowered for only being rare quality, as it doesn't even require attunement. So it easily earns a number 1 spot on this list as the best rare quality magic item in the game. Alright, and that's the list. There are a lot of really good rare items. So if you think I missed any of the others that are much better than some of the ones I listed, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one.